Hello everyone. My name is Elise. Welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing so good today. We are going to be going through my April wrap up. I am very excited to do so. So like usual, we're gonna go from the order that I read them. That's just how it goes. But we're gonna have one little caveat this month. So I'm just gonna quickly pull out all of the poetry that I read in April. There are 4 collections. And as you may or may not have known, April is National Poetry Month. So I think the video right before this wrapped up and reviewed all of the poetry that I read throughout the month. So I'm just gonna quickly show them here. So here are the 4 collections. I loved all of them. If you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts, go over to that video. I'll link it down below as well. But quickly, I'm just going to give a few words on each one, and then that is all. So, And Yet by Kate Baer. This is published by Harper Perennial. Really enjoyed this. I love Kate Baer. This is about womanhood, parenthood, and being a writer in the modern era and all the complications and joys and disappointments that come along with that. Next up, we have Alive at the End of the World by Saeed Jones. This is published by Coffee House Press. This one is all about grief, and it's talking about grief in a very kind of like satirical, biting, witty way, and very much enjoyed it. Very experimental and very smart. Next, we have Dog Songs by Mary Oliver. This is published by Penguin. This is just an earnest nonfiction collection about humanity's connection with dogs and how meaningful that is. Amazing. And last but not least is Home. This is published by Two Lions Press. It's an anthology of poetry collected that is all translated from Arabic to English. There's 9 different poets included in here. And this is all about home and the places and people that can represent home and the way that the idea of home is very much locked in our memory. So those are the 4 poetry collections I read in the month of April. If you want to hear more than that, go check out that video. So now we will get into the rest of the books that I read in April. I read 6 other books, not including the 4 poetry collections. The first one of which I read from the library, and that is Assassin of Reality. This is by Marina and Sergey Dyachenko. This is translated from the Russian by Julia Meitov Hersey. And this is the sequel to Vita Nostra, the much anticipated sequel. I love Vita Nostra, as many other people did as well. And this did not disappoint. For all those people who are wondering, like, it's been a while since Vita Nostra came out, is this going to live up to the hype of that? Yes, I very much think this does. This was a 5-star read for me. I read this one on audiobook, which is the same way that I consumed Vita Nostra, and the audiobook narration is fantastic, and this takes place right after where Vita Nostra took off. Or does it? Who knows? I'm going to throw that out there. So that will all make sense as soon as you get into the book, but let that be a little intrigue teaser for you. So yeah, I won't talk about anything that actually happens in this book plot-wise because I don't want to spoil it, but highly recommend this series. It is fantastic. It's all about a magical school, and I really do think that this series straddles the line between sci-fi and fantasy. For me, it has a little bit of both. There's some elements that are very magical, and then there's some elements that are rooted in some type of science. So it's very confusing. Everyone says that about this. You just are along for the ride. You're not trying to genuinely understand the system. I don't think you can. I don't think you're supposed to. So you just ride along with it, and it's so like well told. It's very intriguing, and the pacing is phenomenal. There's never really a dull moment. And it's all about this class that initially starts together in Vita Nostra. At the same time, they sort of get forced into going to this school. It's not one that they have a choice in going to. And they are learning special technologies, and you're trying to figure out what that means alongside them throughout their years at school. So this one's great. Highly recommend it if you enjoyed Vita Nostra. I think you're gonna love this one as well. All right, Next up, we have a horror novella that is also brand new, and that is Feed Them Silence. This is by Lee Mandelo, and it's published by Tor.com. Now, this one I didn't love. This one was middling for me. I definitely had some problems with it. I appreciate that it was a novella. I don't think it should have been any longer, but this is all about a woman who is sort of obsessed with finding out what it would be like to be in the consciousness of a wolf. And so she starts all of her scientific research on that very thing and is trying to develop a way to interface your consciousness into that of a wolf's while you're wearing kind of like all this gear under the guise of trying to do conservation work, which like that is a potential outcome of this work, but really she's doing it because she wants to experience what it's like to be like in a community, in a pack, to understand like the adrenaline rush you get when you have a fresh kill, to have your mind sort of blanked out to all other emotion and just sort of be in survival mode day to day, like basic instincts. That has some parallels with her everyday normal life. She is married and the marriage is struggling in some ways, and that sort of parallels what's going on with her scientific research. It does go a little bit off the rails. It's not scary, really, so don't be worried about that. Even though it's coming out as a horror novella, it's not really scary at all. I thought it was lacking in some ways. The narrator I did find to be kind of annoying, and I found it far-fetched the reasons why she was doing things. So it ultimately just wasn't believable to me, some of the motivations, and I think that took me out of the story a little bit, and that was the biggest thing that failed me. But I do think that the descriptions were done really well, and the premise itself is pretty interesting, so who knows? You could go either way on this. I felt like it was just kind of so-so, but it's short, so you're not going to give up a lot if you try to read it. So that is Feed Them Silence. The next thing that I read was another library book, so you're getting another picture, and that is A Sinister Revenge by Deanna Raybourn. This is the next installment in the Veronica Speedwell mystery series. These are published by Berkeley, and this is the 8th book in this series. So again, I won't talk specifically about the plot of this one, but I will say that I really enjoyed it. It's not my favorite in the series by any means, but I always enjoy it. It's such a fun time. I like a typical murder mystery where you're getting lots of like clue deduction and investigation, and it has a comedic tone to it, similar to the way that Sherlock Holmes does. And this is all about Veronica and Stoker, who have some sexual tension between the two of them and often find themselves involved in murder mysteries. So this is another one in the series, and I think it's great. You'll like it if you're already this far into the series, but highly recommend you start this if you haven't already. It's as fantastic as everyone says it is. Really recommend. So that is A Sinister Revenge. And then the next book that I read for the month was Tender is the Flesh. This is by Augustina Bazterrica, and it's translated from the Spanish by Sarah Moss, and this is published by Scribner. This book is very popular. It's been everywhere. It is all about a dystopian future in which all meat has been contaminated and is no longer safe to eat. It's lethal if you were to consume the contaminated meat for humans. So the government decides to make consumption of humans legal. And they do this by kind of disguising the language around humans. They call them heads, and basically they're like farm-raised humans that are meant for consumption. And it is horrific to read. Now, this is a horror novel. I knew that going in, but this was one of the most graphic and grotesque things that I have ever read. It really does not shy away from that. I was a little shocked at how consistent the violence and depictions of that were. I do think that while I think that this novel was overall well done, it wasn't perfect for me. And really the things that I disliked about it are like, it was sort of unrelentingly fucked up. and I don't think it needed to be that much. It was a little heavy-handed, I would say, and I don't think that was necessary. It just kind of, at the end, I was like, come on, like, we get the point. I don't need any more of this. And I do think there's a scene that comes near the end that I'm not going to spoil anything for, but it's around a laboratory. So if you know that scene, you know. That scene, I think, should have come earlier in the book, and we should have cut out some of the scenes leading up to that. I just think it was like hitting us over the head a little bit with scenes that were too similar to one another. That scene is important. I don't think that one should be cut, but it needed to come earlier, and I think the book overall needed to be a little bit shorter. Other than that, though, I think, you know, this is very much a critique on agriculture in general and the meat industry in general, but it's also a critique on the government entities that regulate our food systems, which I think it's really smart in that way, and the corruption that is involved in some of the decision making around our food sources. So yeah, I think overall this was well done. Just a few issues that I had with it, but yeah, definitely recommend as everyone else has. So that is Tender as the Flesh. Next up, we have Carnality, and this is by Lina, Woolf. This is translated from the Swedish by Frank Perry. I've talked about this cover every time I've held it up, but it's because it's so fantastic. I mean, you can't argue with that. This is published by Other Press. And this was fucking wild, okay? I don't know what I was expecting going into this, but it was not what I received. I ranted to one of my friends, Jen, for like 20 minutes at least about this because I just like needed to talk to someone about it. So I'm gonna try and do my best to summarize it here, but honestly, like, this thing is a fucking trip. This is about a journalist who is from Sweden but is traveling to Spain for a few months to do basically like travel articles on Spain. When she first arrives, two things happen. One, she meets this couple on the beach. They're an older couple who seem very much in love, but the man is ill and he needs a lot of assistance in order to be able to move around, all those types of things. So that's the first thing. Then she also meets this other man at a bar who is clearly unwell, kind of like deranged in certain ways. And he says that he has this really interesting story to tell, and he will tell her the story as long as she gives him free room and board. That's a very, very initial setup. Very early on, she starts to work for the couple to be almost like a CNA for them, even though she's not a CNA. She's like an in-home nurse. And she's going to do it for free because she just kind of wants like some purpose in her life to make her life feel meaningful and like she's a good person. So they hire her on and she takes in this man and he starts living with her. The book is divided into two parts. One is the story of Mercurio, who is the man that asks to live with her. The other half of the story comes from the perspective of a nun called Lucia, and they are drastically different. So I don't want to spoil the plot necessarily, but I think you do need to know going into this, and it says this on the back. A part of this that comes up in both of the narratives is this TV reality series called Carnality. It's a very underground show. It's not legal. And it's almost like a Jerry Springer-esque show where people who need help for whatever reason, a lot of times it's because they've done something horribly wrong, go on the show, and the two hosts, who are Miss Pink and Mr. Blue, decide if they're going to help them or not. And the way that they do that is if the audience wants them to help this person. So the audience sort of needs to like you. That is all very sinister, very bizarre, very crazy. You just cannot know. Like I almost want, I want to tell you more, but I don't want to tell you more. It's like me telling you more would be like just the tip of the iceberg because like 5 million things happen in this plot. but it is off the rails. It's off the rails, it's dark, it's violent, it's depraved in some ways. Yeah, it just really was unexpected. Definitely look up trigger warnings before reading this book. There is kind of a like darkly comedic tone to it, and that helps. I think that's necessary for this. I feel really conflicted about this because some parts I was like just tearing through the pages wanting to know what was happening next, and then other parts I was like, what the fuck, like this is too far. So yeah, I know that doesn't really give you any information. If you want to know more about this, send me a little comment down below and we can chat privately around this. But yeah, this was crazy. I don't not recommend it, but definitely look up trigger warnings before you go into it and know that you're just going to be in for like the ride of your life. It's going to go to places that no book has ever gone before. So that is Carnality. All right, next up, and I think lastly, yeah, because we aren't going over the poetry. The last thing that I read in the month of April that wasn't a poetry collection is The Sign of Four. This is by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I have the headline editions, and this one was okay for me. I would say like good, not great. The murder in this one was very interesting. This novel has Mary Marston, who you may know if you've seen any of the adaptations, is the love interest for Dr. Watson. She comes to Sherlock basically saying that her father disappeared 10 years ago and they were supposed to meet for like the first time in a long, long time. She was raised in a boarding house, and because her father was in the military and her mother had died, I think, or was like not in the picture for some reason. So he says, oh, I'm finally going to get military leave for 12 months. I very much want to see you. This is all 10 years ago. And she's getting ready to meet him, and then he never shows up. Over the years since then, she has been receiving on her birthday a single pearl that is of very high quality, and she has never known where they've been coming from. Then, right before she meets Sherlock, she gets a letter saying that they want to meet up with her, and she's allowed to bring support if she doesn't feel safe. She just can't bring any police. So she goes to Sherlock to ask if he will come with her, and Watson, of course, goes along for the ride as well. Now, what ensues after that, and this is all in the blurb, is they meet this unknown benefactor. There's stuff revealed about hidden treasure. There's a murder. There's lots of criminal masterminds involved. And that was all really fun and intriguing. I think the murder in this one is really interesting to try and solve. The body that they find is in like this like sinister smile. It's just all really atmospheric and fascinating. The thing that I didn't like about this is this had a solid amount of racism in it. And whereas the first one, it had like one or two really, really brief lines that were not relevant to the plot at all. This one had it more embedded into the story. You couldn't really get away from it. And that just totally like tarnishes it. So it's hard to read that. It is really short, but yeah, just know that going in, it's very much like saying typical things of the time. But yeah, there's definitely more of it in here than in A Study in Scarlet. So that is The Sign of Four. Really interesting in some ways, kind of a bummer in other ways, but there it is. So those were all of the books that I read in the month of April. Again, if you would like to hear more about all the poetry that I read, go down to that video down below. And if you would like to hear even more in-depth thoughts around this book, that video will be coming out soon. So please let me know if you have read any of these and what you thought, particularly if you've read Carnality, because my God, what is going on? I need to talk to someone else who has read that book, please. And let me know your favorite book that you read in the month of April, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.